Hello and welcome back. The waiting is over. Your fantasy playoffs are probably starting this week, and even if they aren't, this is crunch time for fantasy. So sit back, crack open a cold one. Today's mega episode will give you everything you need to win your week. Now we'll start where we always do with the schedule, and we'll look at the teams that play 4 times. There's 54 games this week, 14 teams play 4 times. The Red Wings and the Panthers only play twice. So if you own Bobrovsky or Husso, and you have to pay attention to the goaltending streamers section of this video at the end and add someone because you may not hit your minimum start threshold. If you have top offensive players from the Wings or Panthers, you should probably hold on because the Wings from week 23 onward play the most games, 14, along with Carolina and Philly, and the Panthers have a reasonable schedule as well. So you're only thinking about your goaltending if you own Detroit or Florida goaltenders. Obviously, it's not a great week to own Ekblad or Larkin or any of those type of players, but you're not going to drop them because they do have a decent schedule going forward. Now, not every 4-game schedule is created equal, so let's look at the exercise that I had already done in the preview video for the playoffs. A couple of weeks ago, I did a preview video looking over the schedules for the playoffs so you could get out in front of it ahead of your trade deadlines. Now, one team has a perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. That is Buffalo. They do have a couple of difficult matchups to start the week in Toronto and then at the end of the week against Boston, but this Flyers game should provide some offense. This game could provide some offense with the lack of defense lately in Washington, at least the guys that they've shipped out. But quick update, John Carlson has been skating in a non-contact jersey, so fingers crossed he probably won't be back this week, but something to keep an eye on going forward. Now, the second best schedule this week is Toronto. They play 3 of the light nights. They have 2 difficult matchups here against Colorado and Carolina, and a back-to-back with travel involved, so that's going to be a little bit difficult. But because of this, these are 2 pretty good defensive teams, so you're not going to get a lot of scoring depth on the waiver wire from Toronto, but you can find other players to give you volume in hits and blocks categories, and we'll cover that in just a second. Now, the next best schedule, in my opinion, is Colorado because they play Monday and Wednesday, the off nights. They have a back-to-back with travel involved at Toronto, at Ottawa in the middle of the week, and then they have a reasonable matchup against Detroit on Saturday. So if you own any of the big dogs in Colorado, this is not really going to be too crazy for you. You're going to hold on to these guys, and they're going to get in your lineup no matter what. But if you have some waiver streamable guys, you can get them in at least 3 nights probably, maybe not this Saturday. It's going to be really tough to get guys in the lineup on Saturday. Now, there's another play that you could make if you want a 5-game week out of 1 roster spot, and I covered this in the other video. You could start by picking up somebody off of Dallas or Montreal for the front-loaded back-to-back. The easier back-to-back would maybe be this one, although, I mean, come on, that's not. This one is away on both nights. This one has travel involved, but you do have the Colorado Avalanche sitting there Monday, so it really just comes down to who you can find on the waiver wire, and we'll cover that later on as well. But you pick up these guys for the front half, you drop them Wednesday morning, and you pick up somebody from Anaheim or St. Louis. And they have the perfect, what would be the perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, but they don't play Monday. So it's just the back half, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday schedule, which is really nice. They will get into your lineup 3 times, pretty much no matter what, because nobody else is going to be playing on those days. So one thing I wanted to add, Vrana has been playing in the top 6 in St. Louis. He's been traditionally one of the best 5-on-5 goal scorers in the league. It hasn't worked for him in the last 2 years or so with the things that he's had to go through, and we, the player assistance program, the injuries, and everything else. But it's a nice buy low, low risk kind of play if you wanted to pick up Vrana for the back half of this week. Just wanted to put that out there because I didn't highlight him in the video. Now, the worst schedules, quote unquote, are the following. Obviously, Detroit and Florida only have 2 games. They're going to face Saros and then Colorado. So you don't want to pick up anybody off of Detroit. Florida has a winnable game against Montreal, but then a very difficult game on Saturday, and you're not going to get them in the lineup on Saturday with that many games. So this is going to be a hard pass for me picking up guys on either of these 2 teams. And then we have these teams here. Now, for the Devils, it's a really difficult matchup. 3 heavy nights, a Saturday, Sunday road back-to-back, very difficult schedule, but the Devils may be able to handle it. So This is obviously a Stanley Cup caliber team that they're playing 3 times in 1 week for whatever reason, and there's a road back-to-back at the end of it, which is difficult, but that means Akira Schmid might start, and he is featured in the goalie section of this video, so stay tuned for that. Now, for the Rangers, it's another type of situation where, same with the Devils, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday heavy, but then there's a back-to-back at the end. So you can maybe think of Rangers ads for this game against Nashville, maybe even if you needed to for the Saturday, Sunday, but again, this Saturday is pretty clogged up. But this isn't necessarily a bad schedule. It's just that you're not going to want to add anybody for waiver purposes on those heavy nights, and that that kind of sets up for failure because of all the games that are going to be in action on those particular nights. So you're not going to want to add players, but if you own them already, you're not going to want to drop them either. They're all playing really well, and there's a lot of exposure up and down that lineup with points coming from pretty much every line and every defensive pair. So. And then the Jets down here at the bottom, same thing, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and a road back-to-back at the end. That is a little bit difficult, although they may face Lankinen for this game because the Predators face the Rangers the next night. It just depends on who they want Saros to face, but the other, whoever starts on Saturday won't play Sunday, I would imagine, so Lankinen will play one of those 2 games. And then if Lankinen starts this game, they'll probably see Lankinen and then Binnington, which is a pretty favorable offensive matchup for them because these 2 games are going to be very defensive and hard to score against 2 of the best defensive teams in the league. But with all of that said, and that was a mouthful, let's go to the best schedule of the week and see who we can add from the Buffalo Sabres. Now, for Buffalo, there's a bunch of different players you can have at various percentage ownership. So let's start with Dylan Cousins, 63% owned. This is a shallow league play. He's a center, 5 goals, 2 assists, 24 shots in the last 7 games. So 7 points, a point per game over the last 7. They've reunited that Cousins, Quinn, Peterka line as the second line, which is favorable because they had a lot of chemistry together earlier in the season. And if you look at his hub, 93rd percentile in goal production, 91st in points, and then pretty good in all the other offensive categories, just not a big hitter or shot blocker. So in the league without hits and blocks, he becomes even more valuable than that. But he's a nice little shallow league play. If you want to get a little bit deeper, Jack Quinn on the same line as I just mentioned. 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points in his last 7 games. He's dual position eligible, so that is nice, especially on a week where you don't really have to worry about it on the off nights, but even still, just in case there is a question mark on your roster, he can get in. And then you notice some of these guys are a little bit lower down because they're less complete in terms of their rating. With hits and blocks, Quinn is a 51, so a lot less complete, but they did have really good chemistry earlier in the season with this particular line combo, and you could access Quinn or Peterka off this line in pretty much any league. So those would be some deeper league options, Quinn or Peterka. You also have Casey Middlestat, 4% owned. He's got 12 points in his last 14 games, so 3 goals, 9 assists, and it's been happening for quite a while. It's pretty close to a point per game, as close as you'll get at 4% ownership. He's third-line center right now, but he's also getting power play 2-time. So if you're in a deep league and you need somebody for these off nights, that would be an interesting play, as he's been getting it done pretty much for the last month. And then the last player I wanted to talk about, Kyle Oposo, 1% owned, single position right wing, is not very appealing, but 2 goals, 10 shots in his last 4 games, and he's a veteran. So as the games start to mean more, they're going to lean on him in bigger situations. So maybe that could be something that you could get access to. But the other thing I wanted to mention is Jordan Greenway is also 1% owned, and he's on line 1 right now with Thompson and Skinner. And he scored the other night. His stats don't look great, and he doesn't look great on the hub, 33.6 on the rating scale because he's not been very good with Minnesota. But if he's going to get that garden seat on the top line in Buffalo, that's going to be something that you're going to want to pay attention to, especially if you're in a deep league. But now let's transition over to Toronto waiver ads. And as I mentioned, the Leafs are where you want to go right now to get hits and blocks D. So Luke Schenn is one of the best hitters in the entire game. I didn't add his player hub here, but you can tell that he is one of the best by looking at 3.5 hits per game, and that's below his average. I believe he's averaging well over 4 hits per game. So in his 2 games with the Leafs, he's kind of just tentative, feeling it out. But after that, he will probably start to lay out everybody that moves. And Jake McCabe is a similar case. He's more of a hits and blocks option. 10 hits, 5 blocks in his last 5 games to go with an assist and 7 shots. He's only 8% owned. So if you can't get Schenn, you can get McCabe. But if you just want hits and you don't need blocks, you could go for Noel Acciari. 2.8 hits per game in his last 5, but that's also low for where he's normally at. He's well above 3 hits per game on average. And then last but not least, if you're looking for offense, Calle Jarnkrok, he's been a guy that they've moved up in the lineup into the top 6 at times. He's got 2 goals, 8 shots in his last 3 games. So he could be a potential option if they bump him back up into the top 6. O'Reilly's been injured. He's got a broken finger or something to that effect, so they have to shuffle some things around. I've seen Kerfoot on the top line recently, but you'll have to monitor line assignments. If you see Jarnkrok anywhere near the top 6, that is valuable. At 3% owned, a guy who's 3 position eligible and in the Leafs top 6 is definitely going to be something you're going to want to add to your team. But that's going to do it for Toronto waiver ads. Obviously, they're going to have to use both goaltenders this week, so if you can find Matt Murray or Samsonov on the wire, definitely do that for the second night of the back-to-back. And now we have Colorado waiver ads. Again, no player hubs in this one. There's just way too much to cover. I have to kind of speed things along a little bit. But Sam Girard is on fire right now. A goal, 5 assists, 6 points, 2 power play points, and 10 shots and 13 blocks in his last 7 games. And this brings out an interesting conversation. So Girard versus Byram. When Makar was hurt, both of these guys got elevated roles on the power play and were increasing in their percentage ownership. Since Makar came back on March 4th, Byram has 0 points. Girard has a goal, 4 assists, 5 points in 4 games, and 2 of those on the power play. So if you're looking at their hub comparison, and you can find this comparison tool in the Patreon link in the description below and all the player hubs as well. But if you're looking at the comparison, Byram is the much more complete player, getting hits, blocks, getting some power play production, same as Girard, but he's also getting goal production as well. And that is something that Girard doesn't really get as much of, 30% less in terms of his percentile rank. So if you're looking for a more complete option, typically you're looking at Bowen Byram. If you're looking for the hotter player right now, you're looking at Sam Girard. But those would be some defensive ads for Colorado. Let's look at the forwards. So Evan Rodriguez, 9% owned, 3 position eligible. That is very important when it comes to your playoff schedule. Again, they play the 2 off nights, but then they have 2 non-off nights, the 2 heavier nights, Thursday and Saturday. So if he's 3 position eligible, you may be able to get him in your lineup. And why would you want to do that? Well, he just got upgraded to Power Play 1. They sent Lehkonen to Power Play 2. Now, that could be temporary, but it could stick because he's been there before earlier in the year when they had some injuries. And he was very good on Power Play 1 in January. So that is something to monitor and keep an eye on that line assignment. If he's still getting that Power Play time and he's 3 position eligible, that is a nice little 9% own if you can get him on your waiver wire. He's also playing line 2 right now with Mikko Rantanen and the next guy we're going to cover, JT Compher. Now, Compher, the production has disappeared recently, but he's still the second line center with Rantanen and Erod. If you own him, I would hold. If you're looking to add, he's not a bad choice, but Rodriguez gets the edge at the time of making this video because of the 3 position eligibility, the lower ownership percentage, 2 goals, 1 assist, a power play point, 12 shots in his last 4 games, so that's 3 shots per game, and he's getting elevated to PP1. So for me, the hotter of the 2 players is Rodriguez right now, but if you own Compher, I wouldn't worry too much. He's still in a nice assignment on that second line with Rantanen, and you want exposure to Mikko Rantanen. And then if you're looking for the deeper league play, you're looking at Alex Newhook, 3% owned, center left wing eligible, 5 points in his last 7 games, a goal, 4 assists, and it goes a little bit further than that. He's looked pretty good over the last month or so, even a little bit further than that since a little bit before the All-Star break, but he's been finding his game. Lars Eller came over, and the thought process was maybe that would bump Newhook down, but Eller has been ice cold. No points in his last 7 or 8 games, so Newhook is a much better ad at this point, and he is dual position eligible. Now that brings us to the best of the rest, defensive streaming options. Now normally I try to keep this section limited to players who do play 4 games this week, but there are a few players that we need to talk about that only play 3 times because they're very hot, and sometimes production in 3 games is going to outpace production in 4 games from a lesser player. So we'll start in that vein with Jeff Petrie. Extremely complete in category leagues with hits and blocks, 98th percentile in hits, 93rd in blocks. He gets some power play time. As you can see here, he's pretty offensively productive. 2 goals, 5 assists, 7 points in his last 7 games, 18 shots and 31 hits with 11 blocks in those 7 games as well. He's a 77, which is very complete on the Data Draft Player Hub rankings, which means he covers just about everything. The goal production is the only thing that needs to come up a little bit, and that would also bump the point production as well. But to get a hits and blocks defenseman who gets power play time and puts up offensive numbers is relatively rare. So in your shallow leagues, if he's available on your wire, definitely go out and get Jeff Petrie. It is only a 3-game week this week, so keep that in the back of your mind. Now up next, we have Rasmus Sandin. I featured him in a Fantasy File short. It's pretty obvious why you would want him. PP1 exposure to Ovechkin and company. He is top pair and PP1 right now. So a goal, 4 assists, 2 power play points, 8 hits in the 3 games since he was traded. And this Fantasy File you're looking at, this Player Hub, is mostly without the exposure to Ovechkin and company on PP1. So the power play has come up a bit already, just with the production that he's gotten in the 3 games that he's been over here. But he's mainly a hits guy, 2.2 hits per game, and he does get some blocks as well. You can see his change interval has gone up because of this exposure to this power play unit. I would like to see him shoot the puck a little bit more. Maybe that will come as he gets comfortable on that unit, and that would also potentially increase his goal production as well. But you're definitely going to want access to this power play unit, especially in a 4-game week, which they do have this week. Now up next, we have Mike Matheson. He's also very complete on the Data Draft Player Hub. 82nd percentile in blocks. He's averaging 1.4 hits and 1.3 blocks per game, which is very consistent. He's a pretty decent shot volume guy, 2.42 shots per game. You're getting power play 1 quarterback exposure. He's one of the only power play quarterbacks under 40% owned. There is another one that we will talk about, but this is relatively rare at this point in the season to find this complete of a power play quarterback defenseman on your waiver wire, and he's only 34% owned. On top of that, 8 points, 3 goals, 5 assists in his last 10 games, averaging almost 3 shots per game in that time span, so a little bit above where he normally is. And he's a +4 on a team that has been struggling to keep the puck out of their net. So eye test, he looks really good back there. He's skating phenomenally well. And if he's going to be out there anywhere between 22 to 25 minutes a game, this is definitely a guy you're going to want on your roster. Just take a look at that schedule. They do have a 4-game week this week. But make sure that you can get him into your lineup before you go out and pick him up. Now that brings us to a guy who was in the news today. Trevor Van Riemsdyk just signed a new contract, 3 times $3 million, announced today. This is definitely a deeper league option. He's 2% owned, 3 points in his last 6 games, but 3.5 shots per game in that span, 2 blocks per game in that span as well. He's getting top pair minutes and power play 2 times. So the top pair is TVR and Rasmus Sandin. So that is maybe not the best in terms of getting saves for your goaltender if you own Kemper. But if you are in a deep league and you want access to Trevor Van Riemsdyk, he's getting PP2 time and he's on the top pair. And then on top of that, he's 98th percentile in blocks. 2.2 blocks per game is really nice. So for whatever reason, if you get points for blocks and you're in a very deep league, Trevor Van Riemsdyk has been going right now, and a couple times at this, or a couple points during this season, guys have signed contracts, that start maybe kick in next year, but that gets them going, that gets them feeling good, and they start to produce right after they sign that contract. It's not necessarily the money bag syndrome where they get paid and they don't play as well, because this is not a huge contract. 3 times 3 is pretty average for a guy like him, so this is not necessarily a money bag situation. It could actually be a little bit of a bump in his production, and for a deeper league option, there's no risk involved there. 3 points in his last 6 games is decent, and 2% ownership. He's probably there in most deep leagues. Now up next, Damon Severson, 4 points, 10 shots in his last 6 games. He's 17% owned. He's got a 2.5 change interval on the hub, meaning that he's been relatively productive compared to his peers over the last week or so. And in that time, I believe he was on the ice for the overtime game winner, factored in on that a couple nights ago. But he's been getting a little bit more of an offensive look. And as New Jersey fills out their lineup with Timo Meier coming in, guys getting bumped down, right now Palat and Jesper Bratt are on the third line. So that adds a lot more offense to go around all throughout the lineup. And Severson is a third pair defenseman, so he's not usually going to get this exposure. But because they've bumped up their offensive production over the last little bit, he's been one of the beneficiaries. So he seems hot now. Ride it while you can, but he is third pair, and he's not very complete for fantasy. So 1.4 blocks per game is okay. Everything else is a little low. Hits are low. Doesn't get a lot of power play exposure. Doesn't get a lot of shots or goals. So historically, he's not a great file, but if you can find him right now, you might want to ride the hot streak as the Devils have that 4-game week next week. And last but not least, Adam Boqvist, 8% owned. And this is one of the other power play quarterback options that you can find with low ownership percentage. So 8% owned. And the reason for that is he's third pair on even strength, 5-on-5. For whatever reason, they don't trust him 5-on-5, but he is quarterbacking the power play, which explains 8 points, 4 on the power play in the last 10 games. So that's really decent offensive production. He's typically a goal scoring option and a much higher shot volume guy than this. For whatever reason, he's been racking up the assists on the power play and getting a couple blocks as well. So this is a guy mainly for deeper league options, but in a 4-game week for Columbus, there's not a lot of other options for Columbus. So you might want to go out there and grab some exposure to Adam Boqvist. But one other player I did want to mention, he's probably not there in deep leagues, but in shallow leagues, if Evan Bouchard is there, he's 60% owned. He's power play 1 quarterback on the best power play in the league, and he's averaging 3 shots per game over the last week. So if Evan Bouchard is there, definitely go out and pick him up because he's getting you exposure to McDavid, to Draisaitl, and all those other players. It is a 3-game week this week, though, so that's why I didn't feature him here. That's going to do it for the D. Let's turn to the forward deep league options. So this wasn't going to initially be a deep league options section. So the first guy is not necessarily that deep, but the rest are. But there's a lot of forwards that are getting it done lately. There's so many that I couldn't even fit them in 2 slides, but we do have to cover some of the deep league options. We'll start with Pavel Zacha. 21% owned, 3 position eligible, which is very nice for your playoff week. If you're ever questioning whether or not you should have him in your lineup, you should, because you're getting access to the Boston Bruins, who are 9-1 in their last 10 and averaging well over 4 goals per game. So 3 goals, 1 assist, a power play point, and 10 shots in his last 6 games. The Player Hub is not going to pop out at you. There's not a ton there, but you're getting top 6 exposure and some power play time on the best team in the league. And you're getting exposure sometimes to David Pastrnak. When they switch the lines up and they play Zacha with Krejci and Pastrnak, that definitely bumps up Zacha's ownership as well. So this will definitely be not necessarily a deep league play. The other option you have is David Krejci. He's more of a reliable option in terms of point production. He's got 5 assists in his last 6 games, but he's only a center, and he's got a lot fewer peripherals. So just wanted to highlight Zacha and then mention Krejci a little bit right there. But now we'll get to the deep league options, and we'll start with Jack Roslovic. 4% owned, center, single position eligible, 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points, a power play point, and 13 shots in his last 6 games. On the year, the assist production has been really good. He's been inconsistent. That's been the only knock on him. Inconsistent and in and out of the lineup a little bit. But if he's going to be where he is now, which is second line with Laine and Kent Johnson, and he's playing second power play unit as well, that could be an interesting line assignment for Roslovic in a 4-game week. That's where you would try this out. I wouldn't normally advise you taking him, but in a 4-game week, the volume may make up for the lack of production. So a couple other options from Columbus if you wanted to go that route. Emil Bemstrom, 0% owned. He's got a goal, an assist, a power play point, and 6 shots in his last 2 games. And then on that second line, Kent Johnson, a goal, 3 assists, 2 power play points in his last 6 games, and he's relatively ownable in deep leagues as well. So those are some Columbus options for you, but Jack Roslovic may be the best of the 3 because he's a point per game player over his last 6. Now that brings us to Mason Marchment, 13% owned. He's got 5 points in his last 3 games with 9 shots as well. So 3 shots per game. On the season, he's 7.5 goals below expected. So if it's starting to happen for him now, this is when you want to get access to him. On the season, he was shooting 7.6%. Last week, he shot 22%. Right now, he's third line with Max Domi coming over, so that's kind of helping out their top 9 become a little bit more complete with Marchment getting going because of Domi, or the other way around, whatever you want to think of it. But he's also getting power play 2 times, so that's going to be a little bit more valuable as well. He's definitely a shot volume guy. He used to be more of a hits option, but the hits haven't been there as much this season. But if he starts to feel it, and he is right now, 5 points in his last 3 games at 13% owned, that is somebody that you're going to want to own in a 16-team league or anything close that you can get him on your waiver wire. Now, the deep league play for Dallas would be Radek Faksa, 1% owned, center left wing, 3 goals in his last 3 games. But again, I would prefer Marchment of the 2, because if he is going to produce like this, and he does have that propensity to hit in his file in the past, that would be a little bit more enticing in a bangers league. Up next, I talked about some of those good players on bad teams, and this is one of those teams that's not that bad, but there's a ton of players that you can have from the Montreal Canadiens, and Belzile is the hottest of the bunch, 0% owned, single position right wing, 3 goals, 1 assist, 4 points in his last 3 games. Not very complete on the hub, not getting any power play time, but a decent amount of goals for the amount of ice time that he's been playing. So 74th percentile in goals is pretty decent. 3 goals in his last 3 games, so you're getting a goal per game. And if he's going to stay this hot, you're going to want to ride that streak. But if you can't get him, or if you'd like to have something else, there are a number of other options you can get. Harvey Pinard was red hot when he first got called up, but he's still, stuffing a lot of categories right now. He's 6% owned, single position left wing, 3.3 shots per game, 2 hits per game, and 3.6 blocks per game last week for Harvey Pinard. So that's incredible that he's just laying the body out there on the line, hitting everything that moves and shooting everything that comes his way. So that is a nice file, and he was scoring goals previously when he was called up. Initially, he was on fire with both goal and assist production and getting some power play time. So he's a relatively complete player. When he did get called up, he went a little bit cold. But yeah, again, the peripherals are incredible for Harvey Pinard. If you can't get him, Pizzetta is actually a little bit hotter than him right now. 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points in his last 3 games, and 14 hits. 4.67 hits per game over the last week. So that is incredible. You also have the more veteran options like Hoffman and Anderson that are around 10% owned or less, and they've been relatively productive lately. So that's one of those teams that you could definitely find value, because they have so many injuries that guys are getting elevated roles in the lineup, and Belzile is one of those guys. Pinard is one of those guys. Pizzetta is one of those guys. So those are the guys you want to look at if you're in a deep league. And Montreal obviously has a 4-game week this week. So does Dallas, Nashville. I already said, so Luke Evangelista, for whatever reason, I'm thinking Dallas, but he is a Nashville prospect who just got the call up. Another deep league play. He was top line when he first got called up. Now he's second line with Novak and Sherwood, but he is playing on PP1, and that has helped his production being on the top line and getting power play time. 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points, a power play point, and 11 shots in his last 4 games, and a 66 on the hub, albeit in a limited sample size, only a couple games under his belt. But he is currently 93rd percentile in goal production, because obviously he hasn't played a lot of games. I would expect all of this to drop, but while he's hot, he is relatively offensively complete, not getting hits or blocks, at least none that you would want to get access to for that purpose. But if he's going to be in the top 6 in Nashville, somebody has to score for Nashville. Forsberg's out. They have a lot of guys getting elevated roles in the top 6, and he's one of those guys you can access in pretty much any league format. But another option for you would be Cody Glass, who's on top line right now and PP1. He's center right wing dual eligible, which is a little bit more valuable for your playoff week. 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points in his last 8 games as well. So those are a couple of options from Nashville. But then let's bring it home with Sonny Milano, 1% owned, dual eligible, 6 points in his last 6 games, 2 goals, 4 assists, and a power play point. Again, not very complete because you're looking at very deep league options, but currently he's on second line with TJ Oshie and Dylan Strome, and that line is on fire. We will come to that in just a second as we touch on TJ Oshie, who will be in the next slide. But if you can't get one of those two guys, Sonny Milano is getting the same amount of ice time, and he's racking up the same amount of points as those two other guys, but at a lot lower ownership percentage. So now the 8 to 12 team options. And right off the bat, we're going to talk about one of the hottest players in the entire NHL right now, and that is Jared McCann. 56% owned, 7 goals, 4 assists, 11 points, 3 on the power play, 28 shots in his last 7 games, 98th percentile in goal production. He's already eclipsed the 30-goal mark. He's on pace to hit over 40 this season, which is incredible. He's been one of those guys that I've featured in the hot cold segments earlier in the season, and right now he leads the league in goals above expected, meaning he's got incredible shooting prowess, and he's able to score on minimal opportunities, and he's still shooting the puck quite a bit. 2.37 shots per game, bumped up to about I think that's 4 shots per game over the last couple of weeks here. So McCann is one of the hottest players in the league. He's dual position eligible. If he's available, definitely go out and get him. The question that I've had with Seattle Kraken this year is who's going to be the guy? They have so many guys that at any given point can step up and produce. Right now, McCann is doing that, and it's been a really incredible file. 7 goals in his last 7 games, a couple assists as well. So this is a guy that you're definitely going to want to go out and add for this upcoming week. If you can't get him, Alex Killorn has a 4-game week. McCann only a 3-game week. So maybe if you can't get McCann because of the ownership percentage, you can fill in with a play with Killorn and try to make it up for in volume, because he's going to play four times this week. 8 points in his last 8 games, 3 of those on the power play. Second line with Cirelli and Hagel, but he's also on power play 1. So he's a veteran option. He's a guy that John Cooper likes to go back to. He was benching some of his top players a week or two ago, and Killorn wasn't one of those guys. So this is one of these players that is relatively consistent, maybe not the flashiest, doesn't get a lot of shot volume, doesn't hit or block a lot, doesn't usually get a lot of power play time. But if he's on PP1 with some of those guys, you're going to want exposure to Killorn. And he is dual position eligible, which obviously helps you out in a week like this, where there's going to be some crossover and they're going to play some of those heavy nights. Up next, another 3-game week player, and that is Nick Schmaltz, but there's a reason we're talking about him. 11 points in his last 9 games, 7 goals in those 9 games, and in that span, he scored in 7 of the 9 games. So it wasn't like he went off for 3 or 4 goals one game and then just didn't do anything for the rest of the week. He's been scoring pretty much every game. If you've had him in your lineup, center right wing, dual eligible, 38% owned is really nice for a guy who's this hot. And it's been going on for a while now, and there's pretty much nobody left in Arizona. So he's getting the top line minutes, he's getting top power play, and they're still relatively competitive at home. If you see them having home games, you definitely want to add Nick Schmaltz for those, because they are much better at home than they are on the road. And as you can see here, 95th percentile in goal production as I rack it back up, 93rd in point per game production, 89th in assists, and the power play production is pretty good as well, 0.22 power play points per game. So this is an obvious own if you can go out and get him. Again, a guy like this in a 3-game week might outproduce somebody who's a little bit lesser of a player in a 4-game week. So that's why I'm mentioning him here. But that's not necessarily the case with the next player we're going to cover, and that is TJ Oshie. He's been hot for a while as well. 8 points in his last 6 games, 2 on the power play. 34% owned, center right wing, dual eligible, and he's relatively complete. If you look at his hub, 75. I didn't change these for whatever reason. I'm extremely busy today. But nonetheless, so he's getting 2.1 hits per game, and then he's getting 0.33 goals per game, almost 90th percentile in goals. He's still on that power play 1 unit in the bumper position, and he's on that second line with Strome and Milano. If you can't get Oshie, Dylan Strome is relatively as hot. He's 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 points in his last 6 games, center right wing, dual eligible, and he's 19% owned. So this line is on fire, and you're going to want exposure to them in a 4-game week. And if you can get Oshie, he's the most complete of the bunch, with those 2 hits per game coming in handy if you're in a bangers league. Now, up next, we have a player who was also featured in that hot cold segment I did in around December and January, but for the wrong reasons. Erik Haula, and he's still on that list, by the way, one of the 2 coldest shooters in the league, for the entire league, basically. He's been ice cold. And then lately, the goal scoring started to come. 3 goals, 4 assists, 7 points in his last 6 games, 4 on the power play. And if you're watching some of these goals go in, there's things that are just like banking off players, banking off him. He's just getting the bounces that he wasn't getting previously in the season. So now is the time to grab him. He seems to be breaking out, and he is third line, but he's with Palat and Jesper Bratt, which is extremely good line exposure for a third liner, and he's getting second power play unit time. So that is really interesting, and he actually is the best Devils own in terms of guys that you could potentially own. Obviously, if you can go out there and get Dawson Mercer, get Dawson Mercer. He's 70% owned. He's probably not there for you. If you don't want Erik Haula because it's a little bit too flashy, he hasn't been productive all season, you can go out and get Andre Palat, 22% owned, single position left winger, 5 points in his last 6 games, a 73 on the hub, because he does get a little bit more hits coverage than a guy like Haula, but anyone on that third line is ownable. Obviously, Bratt is going to be owned up a lot at this point, but the Devils have brought in Timo Meier, and that's slotted everyone nicely in their top 9. So the production has been bumped up for these guys, and Severson, as I just mentioned, has been getting a bump in production as well. So a lot of offense to go around in New Jersey right now, and Erik Haula is one of the beneficiaries this week, or the past couple weeks, I should say. Last but not least, Andrei Kuzmenko, top line with Pettersson and Beauvillier, and top power play unit. 13 points in his last 11 games, 8 goals, 5 assists. So really good there. And then 96th percentile in goal production, right close to where McCann is, actually 0.48 goals per game, which is close to, if not right at, a 40-goal pace on the season for Kuzmenko. He was doing a lot more on the power play earlier in the season. It hasn't been that case in the last 11 games, only 1 power play point, but he's still on PP1, so maybe this cold streak on the power play starts to end now. And if you're grabbing him for your playoffs, maybe that's a nice little setup for you, getting some power play coverage as well. But even if you're just owning him for the goal production, 8 goals in his last 11 games is really good at only 56% owned, and he is dual position eligible. If you can't get Kuzmenko, nobody's been paying attention to Anthony Beauvillier, 17% owned, dual eligible as well. 4 goals, 6 assists, 10 points in his last 10 games. And again, top line exposure, you're getting the same power play exposure as well, just at a lower ownership percentage. And I guess, technically speaking, a lot less history of playing well. He's one of those guys that's been never really a good fantasy option, Beauvillier. But lately, since coming over to Vancouver, he seems to have found a nice role. And so he is definitely one of those guys you could target this week if you can't get Kuzmenko. But Kuzmenko would be the number 1 ad for Vancouver Canucks, in my opinion, this week. And that's going to do it for the forwards. Let's turn now to the Week 22 goalie streams. We'll start with a couple of options that are more starters. So if you have those Detroit, if you have Husso, if you have Bobrovsky, some of the guys at the beginning might be able to help you out. And then we'll get into some of the streaming options. But right off the top, Philip Grubauer. I've been talking about him for the last couple weeks. He's been taking the net over in Seattle. He did have a terrible game against Ottawa where he had a 5.1 goal against average and an .839 save percentage. But if you take that out, he's at a .919 save percentage and 4-0 in the previous 4 games. So 4 wins in his last 5 starts. And even with that game, a 2.57 goals against average. If you're looking at his goalie hub, it's not that impressive because he hasn't been the starter. He hasn't been getting a lot of wins when he was in because he didn't get a lot of run support. They were scoring almost 2 goals per game fewer with him in the net. But lately they've been scoring for him. And on top of that, he's taken the net over. So his start volume will increase. The save percentage has been really low, and he was not ownable until very recently. So now the file is going to start to improve as he's taken over the net. And Seattle doesn't have a 4-game week this week. They have a 3-game week, Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. So do keep that in mind. But if you want to stream him for that Monday matchup, that could definitely help you out. And then you drop him, pick somebody else up for the rest of the week, if that's what you want to do. But nonetheless, Grubauer has 40% owned, and he's taken over the net in Seattle. So that should perk your ears up a little bit. The best ad that you could probably get for a starting goaltender is Joonas Korpisalo, and I do kind of consider him a starter despite the fact that there's a 1A, 1B situation with Copley, but since coming over to LA, he's got 2 wins in 2 games, a 2.00 goals against, and a 928 save percentage. Now, last week, he was a 53 on the goalie hub with 24% team exposure in blue here. Now coming over to LA, that team exposure goes up to 82nd percentile, and obviously because LA is a much better defensive team in front of him, they're top 10 in team defense, team goals against. So the goals saved above expected is nice, 9 above expected. The save percentage was good on a bad team, and that's only improved since he's come over to LA, so he is a must-own if he's available on your waiver wire. He's one of the best goaltenders that you can add right now. But there is another option that we could go to, and that is Adin Hill. The 1A right now in my mind. Last 4 starts, 2 wins, 2.22 goals against, and a 940 save percentage. When you compare that with Jonathan Quick, in his last 3 starts, he has 2 wins, but an 875 save percentage. And before coming over to Vegas, Jonathan Quick was basically an AHL level goaltender in terms of his save percentage being around 840. So this is definitely the better of the 2 goaltenders to own, and he's ownable at only 45%. He's actually less owned than Jonathan Quick, believe it or not. And if you look at his hub, excellent team exposure, 88th percentile there, 86th percentile in goals against at 2.5, 915 save percentage is really nice as well. And he is getting wins despite the fact that he doesn't start a ton. Obviously, Thompson is the main guy normally, and then he gets injured, so they bring over Jonathan Quick. It'll be interesting to see if all 3 goaltenders are back before the playoffs, because that will mean a 3-headed monster for your fantasy playoffs. But right now, Adin Hill is definitely a must-own if you're in need of a G1 or a G2 in your fantasy playoffs. If you have those Detroit or Florida goaltenders this week, one of these 3 guys is the option. Between all of these guys, I would say Korpisalo might be the most interesting just because of the ownership percentage being the lowest and his numbers being the highest since being traded. But nonetheless, these are all excellent options. But let's get into some of the streaming options, the spot start options as well. So Pyotr Kochetkov is the 13th best goalie on the Data Draft Goalie Hub because you're getting elite level 97th percentile team exposure. Carolina is a top 5 defensive team. You're getting 95th percentile in goals against, 2.2 goals against, and a 917 save percentage with 7.8 goals saved above expected. Obviously, he's the 3rd goaltender on their depth chart and the only one that is exempt from waivers, so they had to send him down. They did that. Not only does he play well when he's in the AHL, he scores a goal, gets in a couple fights, and then gets called up and has a 19 save shutout. So he's an incredible goaltender, and he's one of those guys that whenever he is called up, you want to set an alert and make sure that you're on top of it and you pick him up right away, because he's incredibly productive when he's in the net. He's just not always in the NHL. So it'll be interesting to see if they keep him up for this week, because they do have a back-to-back Friday and Saturday at Toronto and at Philadelphia. So is he in the NHL for this? I don't know. You'll have to wait and see. But if he is, he's a must-own. Similar case with Akira Schmid, 13% owned, 66 on the hub, a little bit lower. He's 21st on the goalie rankings, which is still really good for a guy who's not really in the NHL. 94th percentile in team exposure. Devils are an incredible defensive team. 96th and 95th percentile in goals against and save percentage. So even higher save percentage than Kochetkov, even lower goals against than Kochetkov, just not getting a ton of starts because obviously they only went to him when Blackwood was hurt and Vanacek was struggling earlier in the year. They would give Schmid some starts, and he did really well during that winning streak that they had, the 11-game winning streak or whatever it ended up being. But definitely, whenever they call him up, he is very productive, and right now he's outplaying Vanacek. Vanacek's been struggling lately, giving up 3 or 4 goals pretty much every game, so something to monitor. He might start to steal some starts from Vanacek as well, but even if he doesn't, they have a back-to-back Saturday at Florida and Sunday at Tampa Bay, so he will start one of those 2 games. If you're in a matchup and he's the guy on Sunday, even though it's Tampa Bay, that could be a really interesting streaming option to help you win your week. But the number one spot start, in my opinion, is going to be Semyon Varlamov, 37% owned on the season, 2.7 goals against, 914 save percentage. The Islanders have to win. There's no other option. They've played more games than everybody else, so they've got other teams behind them with way more games in hand. They have to win, and if he gets this start against Anaheim, they have a back-to-back in LA on Tuesday, in Anaheim on Wednesday. If he gets this start, that's very favorable. Anaheim still can produce some offense, but they're much less likely to win than LA on that Tuesday night matchup. So if Varlamov's in against Anaheim, that would be your best spot start option of the week. But that's going to do it for the goalie streams, and that's going to do it for this video. I wish you all the best in your fantasy playoff matchups this week. If you're not in the playoffs yet, I hope you can get in this final week before playoffs. Let me know how you do. Let me know if you are back in the playoff hunt, or if you're in the playoffs because you watched Data Draft for most of the season. I like to hear a lot of those stories, a lot of those, I was in 8th place, I got bumped up because of this guy that you recommended, blah, blah, blah. I love hearing those things. It helps grow the channel when you like and comment, so I like that as well. Remember to follow on Instagram for some shorter form content. I'll be doing fantasy files throughout the week to help you with some waiver ads during your week. So definitely stay tuned to that. And as always, I will see you in the next one.